Then we came back. I couldn't. Then we came back here to March here.
So I had one of the monitors photographed while they were showing she mailed it. That's the only time a big tripod. Okay, please, folks, we're going to start on time. Yeah, don't worry about that. First, let's just make sure you guys. Oh, good. It's sound, and I'll put my head. One, please do not move the chairs unless somebody in front of you is going to cover you the subtitle. Forgive us, we're a community theater, community bookstore. Until we build the theater, my wife is working hard to create a theater upstairs for small screening, intimate screening. Until then, bear with us, and please know now, when the film later starts, subtitle is key to the film. And Gigi's parents, I'm sure they're going to make a big entrance. That's what worrying me, because we want to make sure their seat is not taken.
We're saving their seat.
Thank you, Baba. Yeah. Thank you. My wife and husband hold it for us. Okay, so thank you for everybody for coming. We want you to just get a few introductory notes, and we're running it the way we've been running it for a while. Some of you have not, this is your first time, I realize, and we'll give you a good introduction why we're doing this. And so first, I want to tell you, this is from 1972 genocide of the Palestinian people that I used as a student as my poster. And I always tell these people I always tell them about this because my son now is marching in Chicago with the same poster. And so for me, I have shelved it, And one day he came from Chicago and said, "Where's that picture?" Apparently, when he was 6 or 7 or 10, the picture had made so much impact on him. He reminded me, and when I went into my shelves and brought it out, and that's what we're using, juxtaposing the two images of today and yesterday, and the continuity of genocide that often is neglected because of the issue of the narrative dictatorship of this whole, I would say, a white supremacist but European driven dictatorship, because the whole narrative of the world is really what the Anglo-Saxon England or the British Empire geographically, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Kashmir, you find the footprints of England. Although now the British stand like they're referees of the world, we know the booby traps of our daily confrontation is actually the British Empire, in my view. And after having said that, I want to tell you about Gaza on Our Mind is really, Palestinians for me, have always claimed the Palestinian struggle because it deeply speaks to me, to my own alienation. Many black people do not have to be told about the Palestinian people. Although we also know there are black Palestinians nobody knows, and we've been in touch. We do book sharing, scholar sharing, etc. That's not even the issue. The issue is the Palestinian people's issue of this being displaced in their own land to appease a racist society who didn't want the Jewish community ever to be in Europe. And that whole subtext is lost in the process. And for me, that is our identification, because all of us have been displaced at the same time. In fact, I'm from Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the first location that the Zionists targeted to bring the Jewish community. If you are interested, go to the Library of Congress and look at Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie's document from the Zionist community telling him to settle people in Harar, specifically Harar, a well-researched by the British location. Okay, so you can see we have a stake in it. Sometimes people don't know why would we do, what are we doing? We're doing that because it's a very connected struggle for us. Now I want to bring the moderator, because you have to know we nurture young people here to be thinkers, to be intellectuals, and to be wary and preventive to not only fascism of other group, but internal fascism that people sometimes, oppressed people, can manifest. And so, Jordan, can you come for a second? I like to hug him when I talk about him. There is a young guy who, when I first thought about this Gaza on Our Mind, I wanted a right hand. And I said, who is it? And this is the guy I said will be my right hand. And everyone is there. You can hear him on PFW. And he's amazing, young, but amazingly informed young man. And for me, even if none of you showed up, he shows up, I'm fine, because this is what I want. Our lineage, my wife and me, want to see young people taking over the activism that we have always lived doing. I'm presently doing a film about the Italian-Ethiopian War, because sometimes we don't know. The Ethiopians were the first casualties of the Second World War. I even went to a British design school, and I told my own father, who fought the Italians, I said, the British, when Germany went to Austria and Poland, Second World War began. And he almost slapped me. I had to run away from him. Because for my father, the Second World War began when Italian fascists dropped poison gas on top of millions of Ethiopians. Nobody accounted. So every time I go to a conference all over the world, I tell the Zionist community, you have no monopoly on genocide. I have a surprise for you. I'm a poor man, but I'm making a film I'll finish, 10 hours documentary film I'm making in 5 parts, to surprise those who don't know how how this history in Ethiopia manifested. Nevertheless, the other part I'm doing is, as a follow-up for Sankofa, I'm doing a documentary called The Maroons of the United States, another suppressed history of African people. And he is the guy who I brought to assist me in the editing room. And I've been doing it for 30 years, not because of anything. I've learned, like any filmmaker, economics, the fact that finance does not exist for a history that is hostile or in opposition to the official history. And so I knew from my time as a student, there's a narrative opposition and struggle that we are against, and I don't expect gift and grants to help me do it. So this is the guy I chose, and I want him to start the program, and he will give you his introductory presentation. But also there's Maritu is the actually manager of the event. She's somewhere. She's over here. And then Abel is the technician. If your microphone gets messed up, especially the panelists, when your microphone is messy, not me. It's this guy that you have to get. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to Gaza On Our Minds, presented by Haile Garima and Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. I'm Jordan Cato Strudwick, your host for this evening. Thank you for being here with us. Gaza On Our Minds was envisioned by Baba Haile as a bi-weekly assembly for our community to come together in an expression of our solidarity with the Palestinian people's righteous struggle for self-determination and liberation from occupation and erasure. For those of you who are joining us at Sankofa for the first time, welcome. This is a place where people like Dick Gregory, Amiri Baraka, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, Kathleen Cleaver, many of the heroes of our people's struggle have found this place to be an oasis, a place where they could pour into others and also be poured into. They found Sankofa this place, and they love this place for the same reason that so many of us have, because of its magnetism as a liberated zone where truth is not only allowed, but nurtured and cultivated. There are fewer and fewer spaces like this in our community nowadays. It's our responsibility, if we want to continue to have spaces like this, where we can tell the truth, where we can encounter authenticity, to support and protect the places where we can think with our best minds and grow together with others who are on the same journey. We have to really understand how valuable these community assets are, and we can't take them for granted. And that's why Sankofa, even though Sankofa itself is an institution that's fighting for survival against the forces of gentrification, has initiated this event with the intention that it support another essential community institution, WPFW Washington, 89.3 FM here in the nation's capital. Director Garima, who owns this establishment along with his wife, Shrikiana Aina Garima, determined that when he came up with this event series, which Sankofa has hosted every other Sunday since July, that all the proceeds from the event will go to WPFW. WPFW, under the leadership of Program Director Katia Stitt, has been the most consistent media platform in DC, amplifying the voices of Palestinian people and the righteousness of their struggle for many years. Over the past year, while many others were bullied effectively into silence on the Palestinian struggle, WPFW didn't miss a beat, conducting a full day of programming in support of Palestinian lives and liberation on day one, and hosting such programming consistently in the long months since October. Some of you may know that WPFW was hit with a targeted cyber attack during our last pledge drive that took us off the air and led to damage to our online infrastructure that has persisted since then. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to consider who that attack probably came from and why they probably did it. The community fought back, and so far we have been winning, but the threat persists. Sankofa and WPFW stand together in solidarity with each other and with the Palestinian people, and we thank you for being here to express your solidarity with us and with the Palestinian people's noble struggle, which is in fact all of our struggle. In past Gaza On Our Minds events, we've heard from activists, artists, and scholars like Hassan Kanafani, Rafat Al-Arir, Kwame Ture, James Baldwin, and June Jordan. We've listened to music from Palestinian singers and rappers and instrumentalists, and we've enjoyed performances from local artists like Nubia Kai, Lucy Murphy, who is here, Mumu Fresh, and the Fotis, who are the brother-in-law and niece of one of our panelists today, Dr. El Bayoumi, and who are also here today. Our Gaza on Our Minds today is a special one. Today, we're screening the 1985 documentary film by pioneering Palestinian filmmaker Michel Khalifi. And we'll talk more about the film and the filmmaker after one quick presentation. And then after the screening, there'll be a panel discussion with Dr. Jahan El Bayoumi and Miko Peled. And I'll tell you more about that also later. For now, we'll begin where we always begin Gaza on Our Minds, with Hassan Kanafani in the interview now referred to as Between the Sword and the Neck.
Beirut is the most westernized of all Arab capitals. The evidence of the French colonial period here is as stark as it is in Quebec. In the days of the French, Beirut was a Mediterranean tourist paradise. Still, there are traces of this slowly disappearing past splendor. But as surely as the Middle East turmoil keeps away the tourists, it keeps away the business too, especially the banking business that had made Beirut the financial capital of the Middle East. Now the Lebanese army has tanks and armored cars permanently stationed on the footpaths outside all bank buildings in the capital. Taking the place of the timid business executive, in Beirut a new business has developed. Revolution. Palestinian revolution. Palestinian guerrillas in Beirut are not like the Viet Cong. Here they're in no way illicit. They're totally legitimate. In Beirut's main street, the biggest guerrilla movement has a 3-story office building complete with all amenities. It's as modern as any in Sydney. But the machine gun-toting guerrillas standing guard outside told me no photos, and there was no arguing. Of the 11 Palestinian guerrilla movements, the most radical of all was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. The Popular Front is now so well organized that it even has its own daily newspaper, with a claimed daily circulation of 23,000. It was the Popular Front that hijacked and blew up 3 jet aircraft at Revolution Airport in the Jordanian desert. And it was the Popular Front that dynamited the Pan American Jumbo at Cairo. The Beirut leader of the Popular Front is Ghassan Kanafani. He was born in Palestine but fled in 1948, as he puts it, from Zionist terror. Since then, he's been plotting the destruction of both the Zionists and the reactionary Arabs.
I know what I know really, that the history of the world is always the history of weak people fighting strong people. Of weak people who has a correct case fighting strong people who use their strength to exploit the weak.
Turn to the fighting that's been going on in Jordan in the recent weeks. Is your organization that's been one side of the fight? What has it achieved?
One thing, that we have a case to fight for. That's very much. These people, the Palestinian people, prefer to die standing than to lose its case. We achieved proving that the king is wrong. We achieved proving that this nation is going to continue fighting till victory. We achieved that our people could never be defeated. We achieved teaching every single person in this world that we are a small, brave nation who are going to fight to the last drop of blood to put justice for ourselves after the world failed in giving it to us. This is what we achieved.
It does seem that the war, the civil war, has been quite fruitless.
It's not a civil war. It's a people defending themselves against a fascist government, which you are defending because just King Hussein has an Arab passport. It's not a civil war.
Or a conflict.
It's not a conflict. It's a liberation movement fighting for justice.
Well, whatever it might be best
It's
called.
not whatever, because this is where the problem starts. because this is what makes you answer all your questions, ask you all your questions. This is exactly where the problem starts. This is a people who is discriminated, is fighting for his rights. This is the story. If you will say it's a civil war, then your questions will be justified. If you will say it's a conflict, then of course it's a surprise to know what's happening.
Why won't your organization engage in peace talks with the Israelis?
You don't mean exactly peace talks, you mean capitulation, surrendering.
Why not just talk?
Talk to whom?
Talk to the Israeli leaders.
That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean?
Well, if there were no swords and no guns in the room, you could still talk.
No, I have never seen any talk between a colonialist case and a national liberation movement.
But despite this, why not talk?
Talk about what?
Talk about the possibility of not fighting.
Not fighting for what?
Not fighting at all, no matter what for.
Yeah, people usually fight for something and they stop fighting for something. So you can't tell me even why should we speak about what?
Well, stop fighting.
For what? Or talk about stop fighting why?
Talk to stop fighting, to stop the death and the misery, the destruction, the pain.
The misery and the destruction and the pain and the death of whom?
Of Palestinians, of Israelis, of Arabs.
Of the Palestinian people who are uprooted, thrown in the camps, living in starvation, killed for 20 years, and forbidden to use even the name Palestinians.
They're better that way than dead, though.
Maybe to you, but to us, it's not. To us, to liberate our country, to have dignity, to have respect, to have our mere human rights, is something as essential as life itself.
You call King Hussein a fascist. Who else amongst the Arab leaders are you totally opposed to?
We consider the Arab governments two kinds. Something we call reactionaries, who are completely connected with the imperialists, like King Hussein government, like Saudi Arabian government, like Moroccan government, Tunisian government. And then we had some other Arab governments which we call the military petit bourgeoisie governments. That's like Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Algeria, so on.
Just to end with, let me go back to the hijacking of the aircraft. On reflection, do you think that is now a mistake?
We didn't make a mistake in hijacking them. The contrast. We did one of the most correct things we ever did.
That was Hassan Kanafani. Kanafani was a Palestinian author, a thinker, and a militant, and a politician. His fight began when, at the age of 12, his family was forced out of their hometown of Acre, Palestine, in the 1948 Palestinian War. Kanafani's thinking was shaped by the intense shame that he felt when he was 12 years old, and he saw the men in his family surrender their weapons to become refugees. And on July 8th, 1972, he was assassinated in Beirut by the Mossad. Our next presentation is from poet Suhair Hamad. Suhair Hamad is a Palestinian by way of Brooklyn, New York. She was raised in Brooklyn with her grandparents and her parents, absorbed by the growing Brooklyn hip hop scene and the stories that she heard from her parents and her grandparents about their lives in Palestine. She broke on Def Poetry Jam, and she was known for blending her hip hop sensibilities with her Palestinian history in her poetry. This is Suhair Hamad in Gaza Suite.
A great miracle happened here. A festival of lights, a casting of lead upon children, an army feasting on epiphany. I know nothing under the sun, over the wall no one mentions. Some must die wrapped in floral petroleum blanket, no coverage. I have come to everyday Armageddon, a ladder left unattended, 6 candles burn down a house, a horse tied to smoke. Some must die to send a signal. Flatline, scream, live stream, river, a memory longer than lifespans. The living want to die in their country. No open doors, no open seas, no open hands full of heart, 5 daughters wrapped in white. Each day jihad, each day faith over fear, each day a mirror of fire. The living want to die with their families. The girl loses limbs, her brother gathers arms. Some must die for not dying. Children on hospital floor, mother beside them, the father in shock. This is my family. I have failed them. This is my family. I did not raise their heads. I have buried them. My family. What will I do now? My family is bread. One fish, one people cut into pieces. There is a thirst, theft's life. There is a hunger, a winter within winter. Some must die to bring salvation. I have come to end times always present. The woman lost parents, her children, and screams, my sister. I have lost my sister. I want to die. My sister's eyes were honey, her voice mine. I can't face this. Only God, my sister. Medics killed, schools hit, convoys bombed. The injured are dying, the dead are buried in 3 hours. The people pray together and curse. The people mourn loud and quiet, always too loud, not enough. Some must die because they are the vicinity. Some must die because it was written. No, army does not apologize, has never apologized. Authority chases paper, assembly, occupation settles deeper. A great miracle here. The living are dying, and the dying living. A festival of lights, a strip, a land, a blaze, the sea, a mirror of fire, the casting of lead upon children. Their heads roll off their shoulders into streets, their tops spin in hands. An army feasting on epiphany, driving future into history, carrying torches into women. A great miracle happened here. A festival of lights, a casting of lead. Rafah. There is a music to this all. The din has an order of orders, a human touch behind all arms, all of it manufactured, stars above all. Something melting, a dove molting, morning through dusk, one child after another, gathered if possible, washed where possible, wrapped, there is always cloth, all the while prayed on, then cried from the women, always the women in the hot houses of a winter's war. The cameras leave with the men, and the bodies always the women, somehow putting tea on fire, gather the living children if possible, washing them when possible, praying on them, through their hair, onto their palms, onto dear life, something fusing into dawn, feathers, shed, eyes, people in a high balanced state. That's when breathing feeds burns. That's where settlers take high ground. That's how villages bulldoze betwixt holidays, before your eyes. High violence, holy children land, an experience no longer inherited, actual. Earth in scorched concrete, heart in smoking beat. Jabari. A woman wears a bell, carries a light, calls, searches. Through madness of Dar Yassin, calls for Rafah, for bread, orange peel under nails, blue glass under feet, gathers children in Zaytun. Sitting with dead mothers, she unearths tunnels and buries son onto trauma. A score and a day rings a bell, she is dizzy, more than yesterday. Less than tomorrow. A zigzag back, Dawaime back, Humming Suba back, Shatila back, Ramle back, Janine back, Il Khalil back, Il Quds, all of it. All underground in ancestral chests, she rings a bell, promising something she can't see. Faith is that. Faith is this. All over the land, under the belly of wind, she perfumed the love of a burning sea. Concentrating refugee camp, crescent targeted red. A girl's charred cold face, dog-eaten body. Angels rounded into lockdown, shelled, injured, shock. Weapons for advancing armies, clearing forests, sprayed onto a city. Old sage tree, human skin, contact explosion. These are our children. She chimes through Nablus back. Yaffa backs shot under spotlight, phosphorus, murdered, libeled, public relations. Public relation. A bell fired in Jericho rings through blasted windows. A woman carries bones in bags under eyes, disbelieving, becoming numb, dumbed by numbers front and back. Gaza onto Gaza, for Gaza, I'm sorry, Gaza, I'm sorry, Gaza, she sings for the whole powerless world. Her notes pitch perfect, the bell, a death toll.
That was Sukir Hamad's Gaza Suite. I just overheard somebody saying she's also an actress, which I did not know before just now. So as mentioned, our Gaza on Our Minds this evening is a special one. This evening, we're screening the 1985 documentary film by pioneering Palestinian filmmaker Michel Khalifi. If right now you can't see the bottom of the screen about here, I encourage you to adjust, especially if you don't speak Arabic, because you're going to need the captions to follow the film. Michel Khalifi, who was born in Nazareth in occupied Palestine, was the first person to direct a feature film shot entirely in Palestine by a Palestinian director, a film that premiered at Cannes, and he's considered to be the founder of contemporary Palestinian cinema. He's also shown at other major global film festivals. He's won a litany of awards for his work, and he's taught filmmaking all over the world, including in Palestine. The film follows the people of a village just west of Nazareth in Palestine called Malul, who were brutalized off of their land by Israeli settlers and had their village erased off of the map. The village of Malul was inhabited by a peaceful community of Palestinian Muslims and Christians who were forced off of their land during the Nakba. The only day the people of Malul are allowed to return to the home that was stolen from them is, ironically, the day celebrated as Israeli Independence Day. The film is about the experience of the people of this village and documents one of their yearly returns to the land. After the screening, there will be a panel discussion with Dr. Jahan El-Bayoumi and Miko Peled, who I will introduce later. Now, here is Malul Celebrates Its Own Destruction by Michel Khalifi.
أما هي بتبين يعني
تعطي ملامح بسيطة شوي.
ملامح حلوة والله حلوة.
100% يعني.
الجامع والبيادر والشجر الزيتون الشمالي.
الزيتون الشمالي
والخضروات والمذكرة زرعت الوقت هناك. هذا اللي ورا الناحية اللي ورا العين هي. ورا العين. مين اللي قرر إنه ترسم؟
والله لما اجى الرشاق اسحاق داوود ورشاق خلص كنا بدنا نعمل منظر على الحيط هنا. شو عرفت لنا كنا بدنا نعمل صورة معلول. طلع على اسحاق داوود على معلول هناك. ما هي مهبطة كلها ما فيش الا غير الكنائس. اخذ فكرة عن موقع البلد وعن الكنائس كيف موجودات يعني. عن الجامع شاف الجامع كمان. واجى لهون وصور المنظر وصرنا احنا كله حطوا دور هون دور هون. هاي البيادر هون، هاي العين هون رسمها. العين كنا تحت شوي. هاي ولا تحت شوي العين، وهاي الملايات مروحة وهناك في الحيك قاعدين بيادر.
Sorry, folks. Give us one moment. We're gonna pull up the version with the subtitles right now. Thank you.
I'm personally embarrassed because the filmmaker Michel is my friend, and I told him it's going to be one of the best experience he would have. Next thing, my crew, the young people, not me, the young people put the wrong ones. I hope you forgive us, but it's well intentioned. Thank you, my brother.
Yes, sir. We'll have it up in just 1 second.
And by the way, the benefits go to PFW. We don't take any penny. This is to help PFW really continue to do what they've been doing on the Palestinian issue.
I just want to acknowledge something. This may be triggering for some people. You know how they talk about triggering? Well, this is triggering. So if people feel a need to walk out, that's okay. Because this is hard. Here. I'm just saying that this may be triggering for some people. So if they need to step out, we understand.
Use the microphone.
It's on. That's all.
It's okay.
I think you heard me, right?
Yeah, we did. We heard. He just wants to hear you. It's your father, anyway. Oh, my crew. My young people. Yeah. By the way, those of you who are really activists who've seen the film before and you've been into many, I see some simmered, my age kind of activists here. Forgive us. Our concentration here is the young people from Howard University, and I hope you understand.
هي بتبين يعني
ساعة ملامح بسيطة شو
ملامح والله حلوة
100% يعني
الجامع والبيادر والشجر الزيتون الشمالي
الزيتون الشمالي
والصفرات والمذكرة زلزلات اللي بقت هناك
هذا اللي ورا النخل اللي ورا العين هي
عم مين اللي قرر انه تبذل
والله لما اجى الرشاق اسحاق داوود ورجع خلص كنا بدنا نعمل منظر على الحيط هنا شو نعمل عرفت لنا كنا بدنا نعمل صورة معلول طلع على اسحاق داوود على معلول هناك ما هي مهبطة كلها ما فيش الا غير الكنائس اخذ فكرة عن موقع البلد وعن الكنائس كيف موجودات يعني عن الجامع شاف الجامع كمان واجى لهون وصور المنظر وصرنا احنا كله حط دور هون وهون دور هون هاي البيادر هون هاي العين هون رسمها العين كنا تحت شوي هاي ولا تحت شوي العين وهاي الملايات مروحه وهناك في الحيك قاعدين بيادر هاي الناس في واحد هناك صورة دار مروح من البيتروم وذاك مروح من
اليوم راح نحكي عن احتفال الشعب الإسرائيلي في عيد استقلالها 36 أعلن قيام إسرائيل في 15 أيار سنة 1948. الشعب اليهودي يعتقد أنه له الحق التاريخي في هذه البلاد، وهي البلاد هي عمليا أعطيت له بوصاية إلهية بشكل أرض الميعاد. الله وعدهم فيها، وبقولوا إنه هذا الحق التاريخي هو من 2000 سنة. وليش من 2000 سنة؟ لأنه قبل 2000 سنة حسب كتاب التوراة الكتاب المقدس بقول إنه أقيمت مملكة إسرائيل، مملكتين لليهود، مملكة إسرائيل ومملكة يهوذا في كل أنحاء هذا المنطقة اللي هو حدود الدولة. وايضا فيهم بيقولوا كمان انه حتى الضفه الشرقيه كمان هي جزء من ارض الميعاد.
ولادي بيعرفوهاش بس انا بعرفها لان انا من اهل معلول. انا فرقت معلول صار من جنب البيت هون بدأت يجي هون معلم هالدار هذا عمه بس هذا عم عوض هذا عم خليجي يفتشون هذا الحاصل هذا الجامع هذا ابو نايف حياة ابو نايف هذا دار جاب مصلح وين تظلها رايح رغد دار ابو زيد هناك لا وين لا من سروات رجوه هنا
على الصبر عند الصبر
عند الصبر هنا بيتنا للاولاد بتذكروا
هاي الكنيسة ايوه وهاي دارنا حجرتنا هون هذول دارنا وهاي هون كنيسة الروم نلعب مع عوضهم هيا
والبيت الحمر
هذا الحاصل هذا بالعكس كان
هذا الحاصل لمين؟
سليم الصالح لابو علي.
إقامة مملكة يهوذا وإسرائيل، وأجت حروب مع تطور الزمن اندثرت هاي الدولتين وتشتت الشعب اليهودي على أيدي شعوب أخرى اللي أجت واحتلت أو ما يعرف اغتصبت هاي البلاد منهم وتشتت في جميع أنحاء العالم.
كانت في عين هنا اسمها عين البص بديت هاي عين البص
عين البص
اسمها محل جيش
الكبور راحت
الكبور راحت الكبور حسب
هون كانت.
مش نظرك ايه مفهوم.
هون تقريبا. هاي تقول المسيحية وتقول الاسلام تقريبا هون كانت.
البلاد كانت واقعة تحت حكم الأتراك، ومن خلال حكم الأتراك هنا كان تعاون بناء بين السلاطين العثمانيين والجمعيات اليهودية. كان أحد الأدمغة الكبيرة للشعب اليهودي في حث على الهجرة ما يعرف بهرتزل. فهرتزل كتب كتابه دولة اليهود اللي بحاول يطرح فكره من أجل تجميع كل اليهود في الشتات والعودة إلى أرض الميعاد، إلى أرض إسرائيل.
يعني يأخذ ضرائب القمح الأرض كانت تسلسل. وكان حنا منصور من ناصر من هون موظف عند سلسل، يطلع ياخذ انما منتوج الارض ويحطه في الحاصل هذا بعدين كان يودوه لسلسل ياخذ من الفلاحين يعني.
مين هو السلسل؟
زلمه قطاعي كان كل مرجع بالعالم، ساكن في لبنان هو في لبنان، وباع الارض كلها هذا للكامل كامل ارض المرج. فالبلد طلع لنا بعد كم 1500 درهم ارض في المرج و1500 درهم في الوعار عشان يحترشوا منها. ظل لنا 48 راحت الحل والحلال.
كانت الدولة العثمانية على شفا الانهيار، كان ما يعرف بداية نشوء الحرب العالمية الأولى. في هذه الفترة أجت بريطانيا عن طريق الحرب العالمية الأولى، احتلت أو استعمرت أرض فلسطين، ونشأ ما يعرف بالانتداب البريطاني من 1917 ل 1948. إذا كان ما يعرف باسم وزير خارجية بريطانيا في هذاك الوقت، اللي كان كل المستعمرات تحت سيطرته، اسمه بلفور. وسنة 1917 أعطى واحد جوائز بإقامة بعد الجلاء الانتداب البريطاني إقامة الدولة اليهودية على أرض فلسطين، وكان ما يعرف باسم معاهدة بلفور.
أنا بروح عيد الاستقلال. بالنسبة لنا كذكريات، ما كانش وقت تصريح نروح على معلول إلا على عيد الاستقلال. وكل سنة بنروح على عيد الاستقلال.
بالفعل بروحش على معلول لأنه ماليش كان بيتحمل يعني. عيد الاستقلال بقعدك واجع بصير أتذكر هذا ما معلول قبل 40 سنة.
شو بتعمل هون؟ مين اللي بيصير المرة بس حي
بس نتفطن نتذكر الايامات السابقه تبعون الاختياريه والكبار.
والله احنا كل سنه بنيجي باليوم هذا نودي اولادنا هون، كانت ارض هون دورنا هون
كانوا سيادكم يقعدوا هون، كانوا يفلحوا هون، كانوا بيدروا.
نحس حالنا إذا معلوم لاجئين، نحس حالنا يوم بصير ترمي الزيتون كله وإنه ببلادنا سلمت الزيتوننا، يوم بصير ترمي التين كله وإنه ببلادنا، بصير القمح بطل بيقولوا أولادنا بيعرفوش القمح كيف بيطلع، لو بلادنا بنعرف القمح كيف بيطلع، كنا نحصد قمح ونحمل على الأرض ونروح على البيادر، اليوم ما حدا بيعرف لا قمح ولا بيعرف شيء.
يعني لو ممكن معمرين هناك 60 فيلا مندسر، لو نيجي نقعد في بيت شعب المخيمات بدون عمر ندسر رزقنا ومالنا وعيالنا كله هناك ونرجع لبلادنا.
والله ان شاء الله مش كل واحد نتأمل، كل واحد يتصل حقه، بروحش حقه ورا مطالب.
لغايه ال 32 سنه بتفكر شنو لازم الواحد ينسى بلده؟ والله ما دام كبرنا اللي عاشوا واللي احنا عشناه ما فيش ننسى، لانه هون احنا ولدنا. وطن اجداد وطن بياته وبصيرش واحد ينسى. انا بنسى الناس اللي هنا. يعني ما ادري زمان واحد لازم يجوز الجيل اللي بعدنا اللي خلق اللي وين احنا ساكنين لسه موجود، اما ما دامنا احنا خلقنا وين كنا نتخصص كل شيء.
طلعت طلعة نزلت نزلت لا أبو طلعة، طلعت طلعة نزلت نزلت لا أبو كنزلت.
مين احنا معلوم ولا امريكا؟
مالك ومال امريكا يا زلمه، امريكا هذيك امريكا ام الدنيا كل العالم بتركض عليها. هاي بلاد
ذكريات احسن من امريكا.
عملها خلقنا فيها.
ذكريات معلومة، ذكريات
اخر مره قبل 4 سنين رحت، كان عيد استقلال ورحنا، وبعدين انا هون بشهر اب ردينا سفرنا على امريكا.
ابو زيد انا مش عارف ليش تركت معكم؟
لاني ضد القتل. نحن من خوف. انا بكيت حامل برن ولا حامل برن ولا قتلني، انا بزماني ما اذيتش انسان، بزماني ما فتش السجن. صار في حرب وهالمعلوم انهزمت بالخوف، يعني الحمل الاولاد وانهزم.
طب كيف اشوف؟
اجوا وقفوا على ظهر الجبل وصار يطخوا علينا. او شو بيش احنا بدنا نلاقيها بالحجار. ولا جت فيكم بلمات، ولا جت فيكم بلمات، ولا جت في رصاصات، ولا جت في كل شيء. ناخذوا اولادنا ما نهزم ولا نموت احنا واولادنا؟ لا نهزم وذكرنا.
بيقولون كذب في قرار التقسيم. اللي بيقولوا ايضا انه الدول العربيه رفضت والشعب هنا كان في عرب رفضوا، اذا اضطروا انه يدافعوا عن حالهم، وكان النصيب بالنصر حليف للاقوى واللي كانوا اقوياء. ما بيقولوش حرب 48، بيقولوا حرب التحرير، انه حرروا البلاد وسيطروا عليها لاقامه ما يرى بالوطن القومي للشعب اليهودي. وهيك متعارف عليه انه الشعب العربي اللي كان هنا والمجموعه العربيه اللي كانت هنا هي هربت هريبه وترجوا ماتوا من الترجاء ويقولوا لي خلوكم. فهذا اللي صار عشيه حرب التحرير اللي تسمى، وسيطروا مش بس على قرار التقسيم وعلى المسطحات اللي كانت ضمن قرار التقسيم، وانما اخذوا كل ما يرى بارض اسرائيل.
لو ما كلوش يرجعوا؟
بلا كانوا نرجعوا، ما ثاني يوم هبطوا البيوت. احنا طلعنا وهنا فوقت البندق. هبطوا، لا اخذنا فسيان، لا اخذنا طنجره، لا اخذنا لجن، لا اخذنا دجاج، لا اخذنا حمام، كله ده شربنا وطلعنا. ملينا اللجن، والله ما ببكر مليت اللجان. الدجاج كان مسلك. يسرقون على الكوم. رجعت تركيت لا لجن. صرنا بالليل وقتنا شرطوا رغم اللجن تحت الرجل.
أنا سلمت على معلول بالليل أنا وقناس، والنتيجة بيقولوا لي في تنجة سكر هناك محطوطة في التبان بقلب التبن، روح دور عليها، روح تطلعك على الدار ولا هي مهدومة ما ظلش باس أكل، وأنا خايف يكون في حدا روحي، يعني إن أجت حصوة هيك زدلكت فيها أكون متت هلكت. ما صدقت، رحت على يومين ثلاثة تاني عرفت أطولها. أنت سكر يعني هالقد هيك.
مش بس هو بس كان يروح. كانت كل البلد تروح.
مواشينا من دون أكل. بتعرف عند الفلاحين في باكو يعملوا تبابين يخزنوا المواشي تبعهم. نروح بالليل سركة ترسنة عدس فول قمح شعير كله راح تحت الردم، نحاس فراش. انا على اساس انه كنا بعد الاحتلال دولة احتلت نرجع، وهذا وجه الضيف.
جوزت وطلعنا. صارت اليهود اجت حياة مرت عمي امه قالت لي خذ اغراضكم وثيقتك وروحوا على الناصر الهزمه. وجينا على الناصر، جينا هون قعدنا بأوضة عيلتين احنا واخوه.
تنزل كلها وانا ما كان تروح هنا. هذا هو الخرز اللي تبع البيت.
بس كل ما كانت من الشتاء.
كلها من الشتاء. اي ينشوا من البير ويغسلوا عليها يا يسكن خيل عليها.
مسكرة.
هو كانت مسكرة عشان تحفظ المي. الساعة كانت كثير الساعة. طلع لاحظ كان الجورة كلها تجمع المي هنا.
هاي الزتونات هاي العمارة هي تحت فيه، بس لأن أنا مش مثبت كثير بسبب شجر عقلي شاوي، أما هذا الصبر والخروبة هاي عرفتها والزيتونات هون، أما الدار هي هاي لغاد شوي هيك من الخروبة ولغاد بكم متر، وهاي من فوق هون هيك صور نعمة. هناك راح البيت هناك، وهاي هون اللوزة، هاي هون باب التبان، وهاي اللوزة هناك أبصر من المقلب بعرفش خرب. هاي الزيتونة الثاني هاي باخت هي حد اللوزي، حد اللوزي هناك البيت. وهناك صبرات شو اسمه أرض نعم العواد. هاي هناك احنا الصور الحد على الصبر. وهناك في طريق أخرى تنزل لتحت، نزل لتحت بيننا وبين جيراننا. أما هاي العمارة هاي إلي، وبعد بنزل لتحت أخرى أرض. بكتين ولوز وما أشبه. هاي الصبر هاي جديد، هاي هناك الصبر الاعتيادي هذاك. تيجي ناس أخرى يجوا يشربوا عرق إشي، مش مشات مستكويات من اللي يحبن كلبك. بس التوتي مش عارفها وين راحت، هي يابسة هي. هذا بدي أروح أنا لغاد هيك أشوف حدودنا مع الجيران. تروح لغاد هيك، بدي أروح لغاد أنا شوي ممكن.
إذا القيام الدولي كان حتمية ضروري حتى يتخلصوا مما كان يجري في أوروبا في فترة الحرب العالمية الثانية. بيقولوا اليهود إنه ذبحوا مثلا 6 ملايين يهودي، هدموا بيوتهم، نكلوا فيهن في شتى أنواع التعذيب، فيما يعرف في معسكرات الإبادة. الشعب اللي تغلب في أوروبا اللي كان مطارد نتيجة إنه شعب سامي وقتل وذبح، كانوا يتخلصوا من هذا الجحيم. وإذا جاءت حتمية قيام الدولة هنا للشعب اليهودي تجميعهم في هذا الوطن حتى يتخلصوا من هذا العذاب اللي كان.
بدي أقول لك كلمتين. يعني هاي هسه أنا واقف أنا وياك وعم تأخذ مني مثلا تقرير، شايف؟ يعني بدي أقول لك 100% هذا محظور. شايف؟ يمكن بكره شو بدك تسوي لي مثلا إذا بيجوا يحطوا الكلبشات بيدي وهذا شو بقدر أسوي أنا؟ ما بحطوش الكلبشات. يمكن بده أحطه بضع أعرف أمي أخرى. شو عاوز خايف؟ مش خايف على شيء. يمكن يحطوني انا في السجن، صرت ابن 65 سنه وبهدوني. شو كان انا مستفيد؟ لا من هلا لك لسانك احسانك يا ولدي. شو بقدر اسوي؟ قلت لك بيع مش رايح ابيع ما دامني حي. وهاي الارض لمعلول وهاي البلد لمعلول. هي ما انا بقول لك. وهاي الكيسه فيها بقر وهذيك الكيسه زباله. وشو بدك؟ وهذاك الجامع اعرس. وشو بدك اقول لك؟
طب بقولوا الاسرائيليه بقولوا انه الله وعدهم في الارض، الهم حق في الارض. لا
الله وعدهم، هو ما بعد الله بعدهم شيء غير هنا. مين الاسرائيليين؟ احنا بني اسرائيل. احنا بني اسرائيل. احنا قال جيت لخاصتي وخاصتي لم تقبلني. امنت كانه هذا الحكي مش مضبوط. روح مزع الاربع الانجيل تبعك لوقا ومتى وحنا ومرقس. وكل الاصفار دانيان وش اسمه.
طب وليش يا جناب؟
بعرف شو بعرفني انا جبتهن باختصار. كل امريكا تبعك ولا بريطانيا ولا ايطاليا ولا فرنسا ولا بلجيكا ولا هولندا ولا بولندا ولا المانيا ولا اليونان. شو بدي اقول لك؟ انا بالنسبه للندمين اللي هناك جندي، يعني الناس بدعت علي. شو؟
طب ما اني قتلوني 6 ملايين يهودي.
انا قتلتهم. هل قتلهم؟ روح اقتلوه. انا قتلتهم. انا ما قتلتش بس.
طب وشو الحل؟
حل قلت لك الله، ما فيش الا الله اللي بحلها اذا كان بده. شو حل؟ حل العداله. العداله اي حق عندك تنطيني اياها، الك حق عندي انطيك اياها. كل اللي بالحق تبعي وكل لك بالحق تبعك.
That was Michelle Leafy's Mavu Celebrates Its Own Destruction, 1985 documentary film. Up next, we have a panel with Dr. Jahan El-Bayoumi and Miko Pellet. Dr. Jahan Gigi El-Bayoumi attended the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for both undergraduate and graduate and medical school. After completion of her residency and chief residency in internal medicine at the George Washington University School of Medicine, she was appointed a faculty member in the Division of General Internal Medicine. In 2013, she established the Rodham Institute, which is dedicated to improving health equity in Washington, D.C., and in partnership with community members and leaders, nonprofit organizations, and faith-based institutions, the Rodham Institute has been tackling numerous challenges in the nation's capital. Predominantly African American Ward 7 and 8 not only have some of the highest health disparities in the United States, but match those of some of the poorest countries in the world. As of 2023, the Rodham Institute is now at the Georgetown University School of Medicine. And during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. El-Bayoumi participated in establishing a national organization, the Black Coalition Against COVID, of which she is a board member. Dr. El-Bayoumi has dedicated her career to medical education and to providing holistic and compassionate care. And Miko Pellet is the author, writer, and speaker.
Yeah, he's here. Where is he?
Miko, can you come to the front? Thank you. I thought that was you. Thank you, sir. Miko Peled is an author, writer, speaker, and human rights activist living in the United States. He is considered by many to be one of the clearest voices calling for justice in Palestine, support of the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and the creation of a single democracy with equal rights in all of historic Palestine. Educated in Jerusalem, Japan, and the United States, Peled is also an accomplished professional martial artist. For 23 years, Peled ran a martial arts school that was dedicated to teaching leadership skills and to nonviolent conflict resolution through martial arts. Miko Peled is also a contributor to several online publications, Mint Press, The Electronic Intifada, Democracy Now!, and Mondoweiss, to name a few, and authors the blog MikoPeled.com and produces the Miko Peled podcast, all of which he dedicated to advocating for the creation of one democratic state with equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. He travels regularly to Palestine, where he speaks and works with the Popular Resistance, the BDS movement, and other justice groups. As a result, he has been arrested several times by the Israeli authorities for his activism, and until recently, he hosted a show on WPFW, the Miko Peled Hour. Dr. El Bayoumi and Miko Peled.
Good evening, everybody. Mr. Khair, Ahlan. First, I'd like to thank you, Jordan, for the introduction. And I'd like to acknowledge Professor Haile Gerima and Sankofa, as well as the Howard University students and emerging leaders that are here with us, including you, of course, Jordan. People may wonder why it is that an Ethiopian filmmaker and professor is interested in the issue of Gaza and of Palestine. When I think back in terms of my own upbringing, I would say that Palestine today is what South Africa was for our generation. It represents the focal point of resistance to a larger movement that is a movement by colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. So just like we are all South Africans back in the day, we are all Palestinians. And by the way, during the Holocaust, we would have all been Jews, right? Because injustice anywhere is injustice for all of us. We just saw an incredible film, which I think is a good film for people who are not aware of sort of the basic issues of the foundation of modern day Israel happened. And what I think is so important about the film is that it really has the story. And one of the things that Professor Haile Gerima does, and I believe in very strongly, is the expression of arts and the importance of arts and allowing us not just to tell the story, but also allowing us to deal with these difficult times. I see people in the audience who are Palestinian, from Gaza, different people have been traumatized. And so to see the stories being told and validated is just as important for the people here as for the people that they're telling their stories about. So I'd like to shift gears and just, first of all, it's nice to see you, Nico. To talk about your story, because your story is unique. It's not every day that we see an Israeli whose father was a general in the Israeli military and really in the leadership of Israel to have the stance that you had. So I'd like for you to sort of tell us about your metamorphosis, your upbringing. Please start to tell us about what made you Nico.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to sit here with you, and thank you all for being here and for this wonderful space, making this conversation available. Before I answer your question, I want to say a couple of things about this evening, what we've seen so far. I think opening with Ghassan Kanafani and that wonderful interview that we saw, and I think his direct approach, his honest approach, his no nonsense approach to the issue is so refreshing. It's so rare to hear today. I mean, it's almost doesn't exist, except for maybe over the last 10, 11 months that people have been speaking so clearly again. And of course, he was assassinated by the Zionists. And by the way, when he was killed, it was a car bomb, and his 16-year-old niece, Lamis, was also killed in that car bomb. And this whole idea of that has really taken on and is part of the narrative, unfortunately, part of the discourse, which is that we need to negotiate with the other side. We need to talk to the other side. We need to, and he puts it so clearly, this whole idea of negotiating between the sword and the neck, this idea that that when people talk about peace, they're actually talking about the capitulation of the Palestinians. It's wonderful to hear, and of course, besides that, if anybody hasn't read him, I think it's really, really important to read Ghassan Kanafani, because he managed to, in his very short life, to write incredible works, literature, and really paint the picture of the Palestinian experience. It really, when you read his stories, even the short stories, it takes you right there to what it was like, what it's like for Palestinians. So I think it's great that we opened with that. I appreciate that. And I want to say one thing about the movie that as I was watching, was disturbing me. Many things were disturbing, but this idea that somehow the Holocaust is in any way, shape, or form almost a justification or an excuse or a reason to what has been happening in Palestine, which is it's completely misguided. It's completely false, because the vast majority of the survivors of the Holocaust did not go to Palestine. Many of those who ended up in Palestine ended up somehow forced to go there, and many left because they couldn't stand what they saw there. And besides the fact they were treated very poorly by the Zionists. So I just kind of wanted to say that. My experience has been, I grew up into the Zionist story, into the Zionist narrative. And, every dinner, every conversation around the dinner table, every day was about Zionism. And it wasn't only my father, but I had other members of the family who held important positions in the Zionist state, in establishing it, and then establishing and running and operating the apartheid state from its inception and decades into it. But then the key, if I was to narrow it down to the one key thing that brought about my transformation from this, very naive patriotism, Zionist patriotism, to a more realistic approach, and then to rejecting Zionism and this whole idea of the Zionist state and recognizing it, is the good fortune that I had to meet Palestinians, and the generosity and warmth of Palestinians in allowing me to go through the process that is required, where you one day realize that everything you were taught was a lie, that everything you thought was true was not, that everything you believed was heroism was a horrific war crime. It's not an easy experience. It's, in the past I've compared it to having a limb being sawed off without anesthesia. But it was the generosity, the openness, the warmth that is characteristic of Palestine and Palestinians that allowed me to go through this process like a child that's learning how to walk, lets go of one thing and then takes a few steps before they can hold on to the next. And that's what allowed me to discover Palestine and to realize that I was actually born and raised in Palestine, albeit in a part of Palestine that's been colonized and has been given a whole new name. And then, of course, the more I engaged with Palestinians, the more I engaged with Palestine, the more firm I became in my rejection of Zionism, rejection, of course, of the narrative, the Zionist narrative, and a deeper understanding of what is actually taking place in Palestine and how we move forward. In other words, how do we move forward beyond this horror? Because the story of Ma'lul is the story of almost every Palestinian. And all these years later, all these decades, almost 8 decades later, look at what we're witnessing. look at the horrors that we're witnessing, and the world is just allowing it to go on, allowing it to continue. So that's, kind of in a nutshell. And about 13 years ago, I published The General Sun, and that's kind of been and it's come out in several editions so far. Again, I think because of my background, people were interested to see how the transformation works and what the story behind it is and so forth.
So I remember you telling me about this, I don't know if it's a festival or what you would call it every year in Jerusalem, where the Israeli kids all get together and are basically cursing the Arabs and so forth. It strikes me that humiliation is really at the crux of any apartheid regime. But can you talk specifically about that particular event and how often it happens, etc.?
So I'll give a little bit more context. So the 1967 war, when Israel, I hate saying that name, when the apartheid state took the West Bank, took East Jerusalem, they decided to commemorate through a day they called Jerusalem Day. And Jerusalem Day is really a day where young Israelis get to march through the old city of Jerusalem and humiliate and scare and terrorize Palestinians. And I remember when it started as a kid. Now, my father was one of the generals during that war. And so, again, to me, growing up, that war, again, I think calling it a war is wrong. It was really just a brutal assault by the Zionist state against its neighbors. That's really what it was. And but they like to celebrate aspects of it, and of course, one of it is what they call the unification of Jerusalem, which is really the expansion of the occupation of West Jerusalem into East Jerusalem. Now, just to clarify, West Jerusalem became part of the Zionist state in 1948. East Jerusalem was added to it in 1967. And that's basically what it is. And I remember several years being there and being there on the Palestinian side, watching thousands and thousands of these young Israelis marching down into the old city, and the fear, the sense of terror that you see as Palestinians quickly lock up their stores, lock up their windows, and get the hell out, because you don't know what these young terrorists are capable of, and the police is there to support them. In other words, the authorities are there to support them. I remember one year being there, across the street from the entrance to Damascus Gate, which is one of the entrances to the old city, and it was an army of militarized police, some of them mounted on horses. They were watching a handful of Palestinians and myself and a few other activists with their guns and their faces pointing at us as thousands and thousands of these young Israelis marched through the streets to terrorize Palestinians. And this is an annual thing. Every I think it's in May or in June, I forget when they hold it. But it's an ongoing thing, and to see the look on the faces of the Palestinians, to see the terror, it reminds you of what Jews in Europe must have felt like when the Nazis were marching in. And I've in all the years, all the decades that I've been doing this, I've always refrained from comparisons until October the 7th, because I think the events of October the 7th created a reality where we have to start comparing what is being done to Palestinians to what the Nazis did. With the difference that almost the entire world came out and tried to, fought the Nazis and ended it, whereas here, the world is either excusing it or just watching silently. But that's the Jerusalem Day.
I think that these are the stories that need to be told more, because I certainly wasn't aware of this, and I think it speaks to the institutionalization of Zionism, that these things are actually part of the celebrations, and again, this idea of humiliating and trying to break people's spirits, I think is another aspect of this. So how are people in Palestine doing? I know that you were there recently. I know that you have friends and other activists, especially in Jenin. Can you speak to what is going on now? Of course, there is the destruction, the deaths, the maiming, just the absolute wiping out of infrastructure, including hospitals, but more, just as important as the stones and the brick and mortars, are trying to really just mow down generations and to break them down. Going after younger people, doctors, aid workers, etc. So how are people dealing?
Let me say one thing. You mentioned the celebration. So in this film, they talk about Israelis celebrating what they call the Day of Independence, and this is similar to celebrating Jerusalem Day. It's basically celebrating the horror that's being inflicted on Palestinians. So the first one, the Independence Day, is celebrating the destruction of Palestine in 1948. The second one is celebrating, particularly what is happening in Jerusalem, which is horrifying and has been horrifying for many, many years. Palestinians have been living a life, they've been experiencing a life under terror for almost 8 decades. A life of terror. Now, there's this tendency to speak of Palestine as though it's limited to these 2 little spaces within Palestine that were created by the Zionists, which are called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Both of these spaces were created as prisons by the Zionists. There's no history to the Gaza Strip. There's no history to the West Bank. These are made-up spaces. And then people say this, and then there's Palestinians who are citizens of the Zionist state, which is true. The only difference between these different spaces is the particular bureaucracy that's governing the lives of the Palestinians, and the particular bureaucracy that's imposing the terror and executing the terror, the policies of terror on these different people. But it's been a life of terror for Palestinians for 8 decades. And, obviously I've been speaking a lot. I speak a lot all the time, but after October 7th, there's, even more than before. And people are reposting comments and things that I've said over the years, saying, if we don't stop it now, this is going to be so much worse. Things are going to get so much worse. Well, of course, after October 7th, things did get worse. So how are Palestinians doing? Just when you think things can't get worse, they get worse. And then they get even worse. So you don't have to live in Gaza. You don't have to live in Gaza to experience the horror, because these are your people, these are your brothers, these are your cousins, this is the reality for all Palestinians. After October 7th, Israel doubled the number of political prisoners. They went from about 10,000 to over 20,000. And I've had many friends who have been, who are, major leaders within the popular resistance and so on, and they've been arrested. And gradually they've been released. And one of them, one good friend of mine, Mundar Amira, from a refugee camp near Bethlehem, when he came out, he wrote something, where he described it, the prison experience. And these are all people that have been in prison many, many times because of their activism and because of their leadership role. And he described it as a cemetery of the living. And then to see what they look like when they come out. And really what it does, it brings back images of Jews coming out of the concentration camps. The horror, the torture that goes on. And this is, kids, adults, across the board, men, women, I mean, it makes no difference. The horror is across the board. What can you say? I mean, the Palestinians are on the receiving end of a genocide. Now, they've been on a receiving end of a genocide going back 8 decades. Now it's been amplified. It's been amplified. And the perpetrators of the genocide are not only permitted to continue, but we're sending them billions of dollars and weapons to help them with this, to make it even worse. Now, I think it's important to state here, although I'm sure most people in this room know, Palestinians have never had a military force. Palestinians don't have an army. They've never had a tank, much less a warplane. So this cynical comment that somehow what the Zionist state is doing is somehow self-defense is insulting. It's just insulting. I mean, how stupid do they think people really are? And just recently, a few weeks ago, a Palestinian activist here in Washington who's from Gaza, approached Bernie Sanders in the halls of Congress here. You may have seen the clip. And he said to him, how could you possibly say this is self-defense? They're killing my family. And Bernie just kind of, looks away and walks into the elevator. Didn't even stop to say a word. This is indicative. This is indicative of how the world is viewing Palestinians as nothing, as worthless. And that's why they're allowing this genocide to continue. So that's how Palestinians are doing. They're on the receiving end of a genocide. How could they be doing? They're doing terribly. That's all there is to say.
It was Golda Meir that called Palestinian cockroaches. I think it's important to go back if one is going to educate oneself and look at what the original founders of Israel actually had to say, because it is born of a racist, colonialist mentality. So you as an Israeli being anti-Zionist reminds me in South Africa, those few people initially, white South Afrikaners, etc., that worked and aligned themselves with the resistance, the anti-apartheid movement. And as you were talking about people being let out of prison, I remember a dear friend of ours, Sami Ismail, God rest his soul. Sami was a student getting his PhD in engineering from Michigan State University, where my parents were professors. And he was Palestinian. As a matter of fact, his mother was 7 years old when she witnessed the massacre at Deir Yassin. She was from Deir Yassin. And so Sami was involved, like my parents, of course, in the organization of Arab students, talking about the various aspects of oppression in the Arab world, but specifically about Palestine. So his father was dying, and so he went to see him. He was promptly arrested by the Israelis and tortured and et cetera, et cetera. And I say et cetera, because it's too painful to even think about what he may have gone through, not to minimize his torture in any way. And it was through that work that we got to meet Felicia Langer and Liat Semmel, the two Israeli lawyers that actually took up his case and eventually releasing him, getting him released. Now, sadly, Sami paid the price, because when you're tortured and just destroyed and they try to just break you down, He actually developed a neurodegenerative disease that was progressive, and he recently, within the last 2 years, died. So the after effects, people think, oh, well, you're okay now that you're out of prison. Okay, everything goes back to whatever it was before. I don't think people realize that when something like this happens, you alluded to something called vicarious trauma, but how this is actually carried in your DNA. And there's no better example of this than the African diaspora here in this country. 400 years, and what that does to oneself, one's body, one's genetics. And I want to just tell you something. In medicine, we never say it can't get worse because we always know it can be worse. So I want to ask you, as sort of one of the Israelis who early on, I know there are others prior to you, have spoken out against, Zionism. I want to talk about you personally. I mean, what's your family saying or not saying? How are you being treated? I mean, I know how Palestinians and other, people who believe in freedom, Arabs, Africans, etc., feel. But what is the, if you will, the personal price that you are paying with your family? Let's help.
So, excuse me. So there's this tendency for people, a very kind tendency, I have to say, for people to come up to me and say, you must have sacrificed so much and you must have paid such a heavy cost. To be very honest, the decades in which I've been involved in this have been nothing but enriching. The work with Palestinians, the work with activists, the work with people who care about Palestine has been enriching. So for me to say, I've paid a heavy price and it's been terrible and oh my goodness, I'm not a victim of anything. And with my family, it's been, of course, complicated. Because within my family, there are all the various shades of politics. But, and so, we have this kind of a detente where you don't ask, don't tell. When I'm there, I stay with my family, or I used to at least, and they don't ask what I do, and I don't tell them what I do, and once a week we have a family dinner, and everybody gets together, and that's it. It's usually on a Friday, which means I come home, covered in tear gas and God knows what else, and just the horrors of what it's like to be to stand with Palestinians. But several days after October 7th, I received a message from my family basically disowning me, which, of course, is difficult, but it's also bizarre because I'm not the problem. Suddenly I became, for them, I'm the problem. And what happened was, to be, more, we'll get into the details, we had family members in one of the settlements that was taken over by the Palestinians that came out of Gaza, a settlement called Be'eri, Kibbutz Be'eri. And as kids, we used to go there all the time. It's about 3 kilometers from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip, from the Gaza prison. And, the kibbutz settlements were really paradise. I mean, they're wonderful. Green lawns, swimming pools, kids running around barefoot, not a worry in the world. There's no police. Everybody works together. It's a community. They've created these little utopian communities that are really lovely, and the standard of living is very high. It was really wonderful. And as kids, we used to go there all the time because we had cousins there. And never, in all the decades, in all the years that we used to go there as kids, had anyone even brought up remotely the fact that we are 3 kilometers away from a concentration camp. I have family also in one of these kibbutz settlements, less than, maybe a kilometer north of the Gaza concentration camp. Again, nothing, not a word. And they consider themselves, to be really progressive politically, kind of peace now people, believing in peace and all that kind of nonsense. Not caring not mentioning even once, like I said, that there's a concentration camp 3 kilometers away concentration camp that has now become a death camp. So when this kibbutz was taken over, and of course we know that the Israeli forces came and killed many Israelis, particularly there. They were shelling homes that were filled with settlers, Israeli settlers, and the Israeli army was shelling them and killing them. But my commentary immediately after October 7 was, first of all, I was not willing to accept the Zionist narrative, which is always based on lies, and so why would they say anything different now? And my complete disdain from this idea that we need to condemn Palestinians, and my support for the Palestinians and the heroism that they displayed on October the 7th and since. So I received this message on the family WhatsApp saying that I'm like a Holocaust denier and how dare I, and they don't want to have anything to do with me anymore. So that's a relatively a new development, you know. But that's really the one unpleasantness that's come out of this. And what's bizarre is that not a word is said about how for decades our family members lived and continue to live in these settlements without a care in the world, living a wonderful standard, lifestyle, and not caring about the concentration camp that was so close to them. So I am now the problem. But I think this is not, uncharacteristic. And I want to say one more thing. You talked about the whites who, white South Africans who, Joe Slovo, Ruth First, Albie Sachs, all of these people happen to be Jewish too. They were not just supportive of the black resistance. They were part of the armed resistance of the ANC. Active, and paid a heavy price. Ruth First was murdered by the South Africans. Albie Sachs lost his arm and was almost killed, and so on. Joe Slovo was exiled, and on and on. We know that there were Germans who resisted the Nazis and paid a heavy price, were sent to concentration camps and were killed. But somehow, Israeli resistance to Zionism is a rare thing. You can literally count the number of Israelis who stand up against Zionism. Now, interestingly enough, I was just approached by a few young Israelis who are creating now this group on social media and on WhatsApp of anti-Zionist Israelis as a group, as a thing, maybe even a movement. But it's interesting that does not exist, or rarely, barely exists. But in all these other examples, the resistance against the oppressive regime was very important and prominent. So that's been my experience.
It's interesting to me, speaking of young people, that here in the United States, many more young Jewish kids are actually rejecting their birthright trip. Actually, I have a colleague, a friend who's Jewish, and he says, I'm the only Jew that's not gone to Israel, whose son has, during the bar mitzvah, does not want to do his birthright trip and has gone to Egypt, right? He's the only one that he knows. But please speak about sort of the I don't know if we can call it an anti-apartheid movement within Israel among young people, but it seems to me, notwithstanding what your comments were just earlier, that there is a shift. I read, and please correct me if this is not true, that there were 1,000 soldiers and others, including generals, who from the military, who just put in their resignation from the military.
It's not true. There's no serious resistance within Israeli society. What resistance we're seeing within Israeli society is to this particular government and what they perceive to be problematic. And I was just interviewed on, Al Jazeera, I think, about a week ago. And there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets protesting. And there's this, I think, a complete misunderstanding of what these protests are about. And what I said was these protesters claim that they want to see the Israeli captives released from the Palestinian forces in Gaza. But if they were serious, I don't believe that that's really what they want, because if they were serious about really wanting to see the Israeli captives released, they would demand an unconditional and immediate release of Palestinian prisoners, some 20,000 of them. They would demand, and they can, if these 100 or whatever it is, 200,000 Israelis marched down and demanded to end this sadistic assault on the people in Gaza, they could do it. But they don't. If they were serious about the release of the captives, they would demand these things. They would demand an arms embargo. They would demand a no-fly zone over Gaza. They would demand serious things which could lead to the release of the captives. But people have become accustomed to always speaking within the Zionist discourse, within the Zionist framework. The Zionist framework needs to be crushed and thrown out. Nothing is going to be resolved until it's all going to be resolved. If we want to see the captives released, we have to demand the release of Palestinian prisoners, like I said, and all the other things that I mentioned. And there has to be a holistic approach to Palestine. Palestine needs to be free, which means the apartheid state has to be dismantled, which means that it needs to be replaced by a free, democratic Palestine from the river to the sea. Nothing less than that is going to solve any of the issues.
That's right.
Releasing a few Israeli captives from the Palestinian forces is absurd. And now they're talking. First of all, people talk about the Gaza Strip again as though it's a country or something. It's a prison. It needs to be dismantled. There should be no Gaza Strip. Palestinians who live there should be allowed to be free to go anywhere they want. And we need to also remember that the reason there's poverty, the reason there's hunger, the reason there's starvation, the reason there's all this suffering in the Gaza Strip, it's because they're in a prison. It's because of conditions that the Zionist state created. There's, you drive 5-10 minutes east from any point in the Gaza Strip, and people, there's water, there's medicine, everything anybody could possibly need. And they're talking about, well, who's going to govern the Gaza Strip? They don't need another warden. They need to dismantle the prison completely. And the same goes for this thing called the West Bank. By the way, there's no more West Bank. There used to be this thing, drawn on the map of Palestine. It does not exist. What exists are concentration camps, ghettos of Palestinians within the larger apartheid state. That needs to be dismantled. So if these hundreds of thousands of Israelis were serious, they would refuse to serve, and they would make all these demands that could lead to a free Palestine. But they're not. They just want their people back. And they're angry, and historically, this is a segment of Israeli society that doesn't like Netanyahu and doesn't like his coalition partners. It's internal gossip. It has nothing to do with the larger issue. And I think that's really, really important to understand. And there have always been, a handful of Israelis who refuse to serve in the army, and good for them. I don't know why there aren't more, but that's the reality. And I have to add this, the only community within the Zionist state that has been consistent in its refusal to accept Zionism and its refusal to serve the Zionist military are the ultra-Orthodox Jews. And now they're out in tens of thousands protesting because the Zionist state wants to take them and put them in the military. And they say, no, we will not serve in their army. We will not serve in their army or your army. That's how they phrase it. So they've been heroic, but because they're Orthodox Jews and there's kind of a bit of disdain from them, that's never, their sacrifice is never recognized, although they're being beaten and tortured in prisons and so on. But other than that, the more liberal part of Israeli society, they don't give a damn. That's the truth.
I think, when we're looking at October 7th, the way that media portrays the issue of Palestinian genocide is so ridiculous that people are not educated about what happened before October 7th. You know, being a physician, I can tell you that ambulances, when were prevented for years and years prior to October 7th from going, to Gaza or the West Bank, and many people have died because they were waiting for dialysis. Many children were born prematurely, the rates of cancer, etc. So this is not something that just started on October 7th. And certainly when I'm asked about, oh, you're not going to condemn Hamas, my answer is this. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Communist Party, because the same tactics are being used that were used during the Red Scare here in the United States. And I think it's important for those of us that are here to be armed with facts. And that's why this movie, I think, is so very powerful, to really understand the history. And frankly, the history that we're seeing in Palestine is the same history that we see in different parts of the world, including here in DC. The genocide is not as overt, or people getting killed as quickly, but there is, Black bodies and Black lives are not seen as being important. And I think it's true, they're not. And here in, actually, I don't know how many of you know, but Washington, D.C. was supposed to be a port city. But then when the white slaveholders who were plantation owners were in Northern Virginia, first of all, Northern Virginia used to be part of D.C. And D.C. was on the Underground Railroad stop, and it was seen as a place for freed men who were able to establish communities. And so when they saw this land, they're like, no, we're not going to let them govern. We still are governed by the outside. DC has no representation in Congress. So the scale may be different, but it's variations on the theme. The template is the same. And so now we're focused on Palestine, but we should be outraged at the prison system right here in the United States, okay? Because I just want to put it out there. Many of my African-American friends, colleagues, sisters and brothers, especially members of the African diaspora, feel a kind of way towards Arabs. It's like, oh, now that you need us, you're going to come and you're going to ask for our support. Palestinians were not like that, but I'm just talking about the rest of the Arab community. Now you need us. No, we should always be there and looking at these issues as being integrally tied. It's part of the same system. So we also have to look at ourselves and our biases and our prejudices and the colonization of our minds. None of us are immune, none of us. Those of us that have the imposter syndrome, if we're in classes or in schools, whatever it is. So this issue of Palestine, it's not just a Palestinian issue. It is an issue for all peoples who are oppressed. And let's not forget about the people that are in our own backyard right here that we see on a day in and day out basis. Before we talk about the food insecurity and all the other issues that are being faced by Palestinians, the Capital Area Food Bank just issued their report for 2024. 40% of people in the DMV are food insecure, don't know where to get their next meal. So if we step back and look at the structure that is creating Palestine, that is creating the apartheid system in prisons here in the United States, it's the same system. And what this system is so clever at doing is making it like it's all fragmented. Well, that really doesn't have to do. No, this issue is different than this. No, it's one issue. And the beneficiaries are the same. I want to give some time for people who are in the audience who have not met you before, want to ask questions, because it's already 8:30, and I know we could go on talking forever. But before we do, what is your hope for Palestine? And when will it happen, moreover?
I think there's the resolution of the what they call the Palestine question, or the oppression of Palestinians and the killing of the Palestinians, is dismantling the system that is killing Palestinians. I don't think we have to invent the wheel here. We've seen it happen many, many times. So dismantling the apartheid state and allowing a free, democratic Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights to take its place. That's the solution. That is the way to move forward. If anybody ever wants to see peace in Palestine, there's no magic here. There's one way to do it, and this is it. All these other approaches of slicing and splicing is nonsense. There has to be a complete elimination of the apartheid state and a complete and zero tolerance to Zionism. That is the way forward. When it's going to happen when we gear up. There's no magic here. There's no Messiah here. There's no Salahuddin that's going to come. This is it. The people in this room and people like us in other rooms. This is it. When we gear up and we become serious about this fight, we will be able to see an end to the suffering and the oppression and the killing of Palestinians. It's not magic. Now, you know this, and perhaps some of the people here know this. We've established an organization here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, Palestine House of Freedom. We have an office, we have a space right on Capitol Hill on Pennsylvania Avenue. And very proudly, we put up a flag on Pennsylvania Avenue, a Palestinian flag and a big sign and so on. And the purpose is to change the discourse right now. And, it's a tall order, obviously. And it seems impossible. But right now, as we all know, the discourse in Washington, D.C. is full support for the genocide, full support for the apartheid state, and justifying and so on, excusing their crimes. That has got to change. The discourse has to be dismantling apartheid and establishing a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Nothing short of that. And that's why, that's the mission of this new organization. I'm happy to talk about it later with others. Or if you want to reach out to me, or come visit, I'm happy to talk later. But there's no magic here. There's no magic solution. There's a very clear solution. It's been a Palestinian platform for decades and decades, a single democracy with equal rights, which is quite generous of the Palestinians, I have to say. And it'll happen when we decide to gear up and fight for it, because there's nobody else going to fight for it. There's nobody else standing for Palestinians. There's nobody even discussing the need to guarantee the safety and security of Palestinians. You don't even hear that being discussed. So that's, I believe, should be everybody's objective, because there is no other way to bring normalcy and peace and freedom to the Palestinian people. And by the way, which is not a small thing, this will improve the lives of Israelis too. In other words, the free Palestine is going to benefit everyone who lives within historic Palestine. And I'll say one more word about this, because this is something that comes up. People say, well, you can call it whatever you like. No, you can't call it whatever you like. This country, Palestine, has a history of close to 4,000 years of being called Palestine. On May 14th, 1948, the occupiers decided to change the name and call it something else. And by the way, they've done this with cities, in towns, and streets throughout the entire country. That should not be given legitimacy. The fact that they stole the country and changed its name does not give them the legitimacy to maintain that. So people ask me where you're from, obviously I say Palestine, and I want to invite people to stop saying Israel-Palestine, to stop legitimizing the name that this oppressive, genocidal, sadistic regime has given to the Palestine that they stole. And that's how we start to reclaim Palestine. And we should all do it, whether we're Palestinians, whether we're from there or not, because this is the issue of our time. We are all going to be judged by this issue. Our kids, our grandkids, they're all going to ask us, where did you stand on this issue? And so I want to invite everybody to get serious about this. And this is one very obvious way not to recognize and not to legitimize the regime and the country that they and the name that they gave to Palestine.
Yeah, before I give this over to you, Jordan, one of the things that surprised me is that there haven't been comparisons, and maybe this is where the artistic world should come in, between the same language and tactics and quotes of the white South African apartheid system and what's being said right now. Because I am just surprised that nobody has kind of taken that on. And I just want to tell you, for those of you that live in Virginia and go down Westmoreland or Avenue, do you know what Westmoreland says? Just to show you that this kind of racist, genocidal rhetoric has not only affected Palestine or South Africa, but also Vietnam. He said that the Vietnamese are not like you and me. They don't feel pain like you and me. They don't value life like you and me. So those circles and highways and so forth that you draw, know the history.
So like Dr. El-Biweekly said, it's time for the Q&A, which I think to me is my favorite part of every evening. So what questions or reflections does anybody have on the film or on the panel that we just were treated to?
Thank you very much. I thank the bookstore here. I've been here before because I used to teach at Howard University. I'm a retired professor. By the way, 2007, we passed the divestment resolution, one of the first BDS things. And I heard in your introduction that you're leading a BDS movement. I think it's extremely important to promote this and build it, because I've been to many demonstrations here in DC, in London. I don't see any BDS signs. So I'd like to, meet with you, perhaps at your group, the group, to talk about that. I also am in Jewish Voice for Peace. So, but another remark that you made was about the ultra-Orthodox Jews being, many of them are anti-Zionist. And I just saw on Facebook, I'm a Facebook addict, so I saw on Facebook like a 2-minute piece by Rabbi Beck, who I think is a Palestinian Jew, and in 2 minutes he summed up the whole thing. He went right to the root that said, Palestinians don't hate Jews, they hate occupation. So that was and that's a wonderful movie. I'm so glad that you sponsored that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good afternoon, and thank you. As you were speaking, to isolate that the solution is to free Palestine is to forget that at the basis of it is this whole belief that one group of people can be better than another. And so the whole movement has to be about freeing African Americans who are in prisons for trumped up charges, or even for the whole prison system, to free the minds of people from the belief that one group of people is better than another. That's the solution.
I'm going to give you this back.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, thank you for that. I think that's exactly right. And how do we do that? We do that through solidarity movements, is what we do. And one of the things that happened during the 60s in the anti-war movement is that there were many more solidarity movements which we're not really seeing at this time, which needs to happen. Because as I mentioned, exactly what you're saying about the prison apartheid system here, it's the same. It's a franchise, right? There's one in DC, there's one in Palestine. It's the same thing. Other comments or questions?
First, I want to thank you for your time today and all of your incredibly important work up to this point. And I have a question for you. I'm wondering about when you learned from the Palestinian perspective. I want to know how old you were, and what that was like to receive that information, and what your initial response was, and how you navigated that. Because we're talking about this theme of language and vernacular, and how we need to depart from the Zionist framework. Because oftentimes there's like a generational trajectory of like beliefs that keeps us kind of running. And like, for example, as we tie it to the Black American experience, if the enslaved were able to communicate with children, I believe there would have been a very different outcome. So I'm wondering how old you were and what your response was.
That's a great question. I thank you for that. And thank you for the previous comments too. I mean, it's just, I have nothing to add. So I came into this rather late. I was almost 40 years old when I began this journey. Well, my book is called The General Son: Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. So it was rather late in the game, and I was born and raised in Jerusalem, which is supposedly a mixed city, a united city, but it's a completely segregated city, just like all of Palestine is segregated. And so it was very interesting because I joined what was at the time, this is the early 2000, 2001, there was this phenomenon, I was living in California, which is where I was living, what they call living room dialogue groups. It was kind of this new thing where it was called Jewish-Palestinian dialogue, which is an interesting framing because there's no issue between Jews and Palestinians. The issue is between Zionists and Palestinians, or Israelis and Palestinians. But that's how it was framed. And I was one of very few Israelis that actually participated in this. The other Jews were American Jews. And as soon as I entered that space, and the first meeting was at the home of a Palestinian, who was still a dear, dear, dear friend, a brother, who was also from Jerusalem. And the affinity that I felt with Palestinians was immediate. And with American Jews, I had no shared experience because I was raised in Palestine. So I was much closer to the Palestinian experience in every possible way than I was with the American Jews, which was interesting. But as soon as the Palestinians began to speak, now, part of my good fortune was that this particular group that I was part of was a group of activists. Normally in these dialogue groups, there was an attempt to refrain from politics and not to be activists, but everybody tells their story and you listen to each other's story, which is important. These were, badass activists, which was really, really good because it really pulled me in. And but when I heard them speak, Palestinians were talking about, I'll never forget this, the experience of what happened in 1948 with the ethnic cleansing and the establishment of the apartheid state. Now, my father was an officer. My parents were born and raised in Palestine. My grandparents came to, help the Jews build this, this miracle of a Jewish state. There's nothing that I don't know. There's nothing they could possibly tell me that I don't know. And they were telling me the day is night and night is day. That's what they're telling me. And I'm like, what? I can't believe it. This is what I can't, I didn't know how to wrap my head around this. Many of the other Jews, and certainly the Israelis who participated, left. They said, how could you sit with these people? They're anti-Semitic, they're racist, they're supporting. I said, no, they're not. They couldn't all have got together and concocted this story. So I began my own research, and right around that time, several Israeli historians came out rewriting the history of what happened during the establishment of the apartheid state. And so I read everything they wrote, and lo and behold, they were validating precisely what Palestinians were saying. Now, granted, we live in a world that if Palestinians are saying it, we can't believe it because they're probably lying. But when Israeli Jews saying it, then it's probably true. And I was part of that. That's where I came from. So gradually I realized, like I said earlier, that what the Palestinians were saying was true. What I was taught was a lie. And it took me a while to, again, wrap my head around it. But again, because of their generosity and their willingness to let me go through the process, and there's never any accusation. no Palestinians ever pointed a finger at me and accused me of anything, even though they could have accused, well, maybe not me personally, but the sins of the fathers sort of thing. That allowed me to go deeper and deeper into this journey and realize, and then to realize, first of all, if everything I knew about this place I came from is not true, and as an Israeli, a great deal of our identity is connected to the narrative, the false narrative. So if the narrative is false, what does that make me? Who am I? So I had to really rediscover myself and re-identify myself. But it was, like I said, it was a very enriching experience. It was a liberating experience, really, because, well, for obvious reasons. I won't get into that. So that was the experience that I went through.
It's funny that you say that you quote the Israeli, when Israelis, historians, then it gets more validation. When people say that the Jews built these pyramids, I now say Jewish slaves. Well, actually, the Israeli historians have debunked that, which is true. It's kind of sad, but other comments or questions?
There's a mic already there.
Oh,
okay. I have a mic here. Thank you for all of this. Really, as a Palestinian here, who have kind of witnessed many years, even the activism. When I first came in 1974 from Ramallah, we were driven out of Ramallah, the West Bank, occupied Palestine. So coming in, so the actual activism kind of changed over the years. Before we used to just give something wrong with this. Hello. Yeah. The activism actually changed over the years. We used to have leaflets and give everybody, hey, come on to this demonstration and so on. It was very small at the time, and that picture up there, I remember it actually. It was used many times actually, and and it does say genocide. So it's not as if Palestinians. So anyone who does any research and go back and just Google something, and educate oneself, you'll see that the Palestinians have gone through so much. The genocide started even before 1948. My thing is the grip that AIPAC and the Zionist people on this country. Now we talk about, the prisons, and things like that. Well, who's holding those prisoners? Where do they get trained? Where do they go? Obviously, there's a big, coordination between them training and all that kind of stuff, where they go and get trained, and that's why they're so violent here. I think I forgot Robinson, someone that just got killed here in DC. I mean, those police officers have gone to Israel probably in order to get trained, okay? So right now, people are confused, and there's an election coming up, and people are saying, okay, who should we vote for? And so is it this or that, or is it a third party? Okay, and want you to maybe weigh on that and see what would you say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just to clarify, Fuad, because thank you for those remarks. The IDF is involved in training the police here. So that's why their violent tactics towards Black people and others are so bad. It's because they're getting trained by the IDF. And that's another specific link that we can make. We're talking about these communities and these movements and the oppression that Palestinians, African Americans have. That is a very good and important point. I'm just going to take a stab at the answer to Fuad about about who to vote for. Democratic or Republican, the United States government is always going to have its policy on Israel. That's not going to change depending on who the candidate is. As a matter of fact, I think that Harris has come out in very clear terms. You know what they say, Maya Angelou, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them. We believe her. She's been very clear. Just the way that she's setting up, saying that, you know, Israel can defend itself and we'll always be there, and oh yeah, you know, little girl, let's say, you know, Palestinians have the right to self-determination. So that's my take on that.
In the early 1970s, there was an American president, I believe it was Gerald Ford, and he stood up and he said,
Not yet, no, that was, he said elector, he wasn't put in.
yeah, it's a 73, 74, yeah. But it was Gerald Ford, I believe, who said that the United States will never forsake its most important ally in Southeast Asia. That country no longer exists. It's called South Vietnam. Americans, American corporations, American politicians did not want to see apartheid fall in South Africa. Apartheid South Africa controlled all of Southern Africa. Cuba had to send tanks to Angola to start the rollback of the South African control of Southern Africa. If we sat here in 1988 or even 1889 and somebody said in 5 years or 4 years, Nelson Mandela will be president of a free South Africa, everybody would laugh. So not to mention dictatorships in Latin America, they were all supported by the CIA, by the US, and so on. So I wouldn't, what they say necessarily doesn't mean that that's exactly how things are going to turn out, but it depends on us. It goes back to us. It all goes back to us. Now, the Zionists have a narrative that is based on lies, very convincing lies, but nonetheless, these are lies. And they're very smart. And they've been doing a very good job for over 100 years in this country to make sure that Americans receive a Zionist education. That's why if you go down the street and you say Palestine, more than half the time people will answer, oh, Pakistan? And if they do know anything about Palestine, it's rudimentary, it's basic, it's not even basic. But if you say Israel, boom, they know everything. They know the Holocaust, they know the Bible, they know all this other stuff. Okay? So the Zionists have been very effective in getting the Zionist narrative deeply, deeply rooted in American education, in American culture, in American media, every state, every city, anybody running for school board, they're there. We can't compete with that. We don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have that influence. But we don't have to lie. We have the truth. We have international law. We have the reality taking place on the ground right now. And I refuse to accept that we can't beat them. That's right. Now, we do need to come up with creative strategies. We do need to figure out how to circumvent the day-to-day politics in this country, in this city in particular. That's what we have to do. But I refuse to accept that there are not enough smart people in this room to figure out how to do that. They do not, they keep having to add lies upon lies upon lies. We just have to tell the truth. And this movie is one of so many examples of that truth. So I think, again, it falls back on us. And anybody who wants to come to Palestine House of Freedom and sit with me and help figure this out, because that's what we're about. We have to change this discourse. We have to circumvent the politics, and we have to come up with creative strategies because we can defeat them. We just have to figure out how to do it. We have to get a seat at the table, both in the boardrooms of the mainstream media and in the rooms where decisions are being made in the Capitol. That's really where we need to be, and then we can start talking seriously about how and when Palestine will be free. So we have to remember all of these stories in context, and we have to know our history well, and we have to again, I believe, firmly see every morning a free Palestine and what it looks like. We have to see it, feel it, taste it every morning and figure out what we're going to do to make that, to bring that reality, to bring that vision to reality. And I have to say one more thing, I'm sorry. I know we have a lot to talk about, but I have a babysitter that I have to relieve.
Okay,
So I got 5 minutes and then I have to go.
In closing, I think, the babysitter is the priority. In closing, the babies, the children are the priority. In closing, I just want to tell you one story. If you go to where the South African embassy is on Massachusetts Avenue, there were where Mandela's statue is. There were two men who have now passed. Dick Gregory and Robinson, not Max, but his brother, Randall Robinson, thank you. Every day they would go to demonstrate there. And every day they would get arrested. They were the only two people that would show up. They would do that day after day after day. Things seem like they're not happening, but now you see Mandela's statue. So, you know, it's like anything. First of all, I say all the people that have come before us, that have done all the work, including my parents, who were part of the Peace Center at Michigan State. Michigan State was the first large university to divest from South Africa. All that foundation has been there. Now it's up to us to build the building on top of that foundation. So with that, Jordan, I'm going to turn it over to you because you young people are really the hope and will continue this fight. Thank you, Sankofa. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Khaled. Thank you to all of you for coming out this evening. Thank you for being human enough to care to be here. We'll be back again in 2 weeks on September 29th for another Gaza on Our Minds, 2 Sundays from now. The format will be more like what we've done in the past, where we commune with live artists right here in Sankofa, sharing their art and solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. So if you are an artist of any kind who wants to share your art with the community on the 29th, come find me or Maritu at the clerk's desk after the event. And if you missed the basket or the QR code for WPFW donations, you can also come find me or Maritu. And thank you for your generous donations. We really did very well this evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Peace and blessings.
First, hold 1 second. Hold 1 second, please. I just want to say 2 things. One, everything that is uttered out of the Israeli system is very Churchillian. It's really no innovation. Churchill started it. Don't give it to that lady. He said Arabs in general, especially Palestinians, grasshoppers, etc. And he was, to me, the British anti-Semitic system is not critically looked by activists. Yes. To me, the Anglo-Saxon vocabulary of racism has hostaged all of us. But my brother, I just want to say to you, let me tell you, I was figuring, I was watching you, and I said, I know his face, but I don't know him. Is he Italian or something with that name? So anyway, I want to say to you, my wife and me watch you consistently every time we find you, sometimes again and again. Let me tell you, seriously, and I hope my English, I'm a foreigner, my English does not misrepresent you or misrepresent my view. To me, you give it a human face to activism, because activism is endangered in becoming barbaric and dogmatic and fascist. But you challenge our tendency as we slide into generalization and fascism. You challenge everybody, not only Israelis, you challenge us human beings to remain human, because you're a human more than anything, my brother. You're a human. You give struggle. You give struggle a human face. And that's always what's important. This world has seen many revolutions. American, Russia, French, everything. We've seen. What was lacking was human face and change. And you bring that, my brother. And thank you for coming. I hope you could organize a book signing with him here.
Sure.
And I just want to say to you, activists, this young lady here is a freshman here. Her question, you see that? That's for me the jackpot. When she asked him, when, at what age? It's so important, my sister. You're going to do good at Howard. Very, very well. Thank you for your question. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Wait. You are amazing. Yes. What do you study?
You are a good teacher. Thank you, mother. Okay.
I want to give you my card. Maybe I can give it to a kid. No, I've been into that. You know, I didn't see wonderful resource things
Mama Lucy,
Yes, I will.
do you have the time for an interview? A quick one?
Quick, yes.
A quick one. What do you think about today's event?
It was amazing because it brought a lot of people together, young and old, from a lot of different backgrounds, to learn the truth from people who have seen what's going on firsthand. Like Nico Pellet, the general's son, and Dr. Jehan.
Should have sung today.
Would you stop messing up my interview? Dr. Jehan El-Bayoumi, our physician who used to be my primary care physician 20 years ago, who's originally from Egypt. And you know, Egypt has had a bird's eye view of Palestine and Africa and the rest of Africa.
So, a lot of people are asking that we should do more events like Sudan on Our Mind, Congo on Our Mind. Would you be participating in those events if we do host them?
I'll be happy to participate and refer people who are better informed than I am on those
Please
subjects.
do, because that's what we're looking for right now for Sudan. We have the sisters Betul and Busena. They want to host an event right here about Sudan. We want people from Congo. We want people from Yemen. Everybody, and if you have any contact that you have for us, make sure you
Let me say a few things offline.
All right. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Gaza On Our Mind.
Where's Gigi?